Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You are now listening to a brand new episode of The Local Lens, a podcast from the Powell County Health Department where we go inside our community's experience with the drug epidemic. We are coming to you from Stanton, Kentucky, a small town nestled at the foothills of Appalachia. So in today's episode, I had the opportunity to sit down with a married couple who work together as peer support specialists for SPARK Ministries in Stanton. So for those of you who don't know, a peer support specialist is a job in the recovery world where you hire somebody for this job who has been through addiction and is now in recovery and came out on the other side. So a peer support specialist's job is to turn around and help other people who are now in addiction or just starting on their recovery process. And they're helpful because they've been through those experiences. They've had that firsthand experience. Their names are Jeremy and Edna Thompson. They're originally from Texas, but they moved up to Kentucky back in 2020, and they're truly incredible at the job. But anyways, let's go on and get into the episode. You're listening to The Local Lens. I'm your host, Nate Brooks. This is a podcast from the Powell County Health Department and Powell County Cares. These are our people, using our voices, telling our stories, because no one sees it like we do.
Well, my name is Jeremy Thompson. I'm 36. I'm originally from Wichita Falls, Texas, and I'm a peer support. I've been a peer support for 2 years now, and I'm in college right now at University of Cumberland to get my LCSW in social work. So,
what does LCSW stand for?
Licensed Counseling Social Worker.
Okay.
I'm Edna Thompson. I'm from Wichita Falls, Texas. I'm 31, and I'm in University of Cumberland to get my associates right now.
Hey, nice. And they work together for SPARK Ministries with Miss Jenell Brewer as peer support specialists. I know I've talked to some other guys that are doing peer support specialist jobs, and they're in it for the role that it keeps them involved in the recovery scene. They've said that it's almost less about a job that they're doing for other people and more about staying as invested in that. Do you guys feel that at all from where you're coming from?
For me, it helps. That's not my main focus, but yeah, that does help. I mean, it adds an extra layer of accountability because now I have other people depending on me, and what a peer does is lead by example. So yes, it's a valuable point, but it's not like the main focus, I wouldn't say.
Since I haven't never worked in it, I work my recovery a different way, but I'm learning a lot of the whys people do the stuff, and it has helped me. I think if I would have had this for me, it would have been a lot easier when I was actually at the beginning of my recovery. I'm seeing things that could have, that I'm doing that would have helped me. You know what I mean? So I do see it's a big benefit. And
what kind of things are you seeing then?
Well, I got saved, I went to church, but I didn't have no really support. I didn't have nobody walking through it with me that knew about my addiction. I went from one addiction to the other. I went from drugs to gambling. That's it.
Yeah.
Really bad. So, I had nobody walking through me with it in the recovery world that could understand.
Was that in Texas?
Yeah.
Was that because you weren't looking for it, or do you think it's just a different kind of landscape here?
It's definitely different landscape here, definitely.
Really?
But also I wasn't looking for it.
So today, her role is to help provide that support for people who are now going through recovery.
In Texas, there's not a lot of the peer stuff yet. As of back then, there wasn't anything like that. Now I think they're getting some, but first time I ever heard about it was Oklahoma, and that was 6 years ago. So
yeah, I think it kind of feels like a newer thing. I'm not sure if it's actually a newer thing, but I hadn't heard of it.
The actual position's newer. I think it's 4 years. But they've had they weren't called peer supports, but that's what they were doing back then. You'd go to rehab, then you could go back and work at the rehab and be not a volunteer, but be a tech.
Yeah. But even in Texas, the rehabs, there's nothing like here. Yeah. It blows me away. Blows me away of how many options and resources we have here.
That is something that I've never heard Kentucky be praised for, is its plentiful resources.
I'm telling you.
When it comes to recovery, there's a lot. There's so many rehabs and halfway houses, and like in Wichita Falls, you had to go all the way to Abilene.
Or
that's
2
almost
hours.
2
You had
hours.
to drive almost 2 hours.
Yeah, to get a rehab, and now it's the closest one.
Let's see. I'm interested to see what you guys see the differences between Texas's scene and Kentucky's scene is, because in growing up here, like, it's been embedded into everyone's lives here. Like, everyone's just aware of it. You look around and you're like, okay, yeah, this is something our community has going on in it. In Texas, what did that feel like? Was it similar to that at all?
Where I grew up, not for the first. I mean, I didn't notice it till probably 7th grade. Like, it was more meth and like cocaine and stuff. There wasn't a lot of the heroin opioids and stuff like that down there. But the little town I ended up moving to in 7th grade, it was bad. That's, you either played sports or did drugs. That was really your only choice.
Yeah.
But around here, like, I would come up. I have family here, so I would come up like every couple of years and visit.
Okay.
Throughout my life before we living here. And I knew that there was like poverty, you know, as a kid and as a teenager, but until we moved here, I didn't really realize like how bad the drugs were, you know, and how bad it was here, you know. And then actually working in it just blows me away.
Let's talk about your all's journey real quick. So you said you've been sober for 11 years.
11 years.
And how about you?
I say it a little different than most people. I've been sober from meth for 6 years.
Okay.
Marijuana for 3, and alcohol for about 2.5. I kind of tried to trade, like, I can smoke weed because I'm not doing meth, and that never works. It's still an addiction. So, and then they made it legal in Oklahoma. So I was like, I'm not breaking the law no more. It's okay, and it's not. You know, that's the thing. But I've 2.5 years sober off of everything. So
nice. Well, congratulations to both of you. So, jumping between the addictions then. I know I've heard my grandpa say, like, just with cigarettes, he was like, well, this is a lot better than what I used to do.
Yeah.
And so, like, what's the difference between, like, taking this step, like, I don't want to say a lesser addiction, but, like, it's not meth.
Yeah.
Like,
okay, so, well, for me, meth, I got introduced to it when I was 15, and it was the thing that took my soul. It changed me. It was not I was not the same. I was raised in a good church home. My family none of them did drugs. I was the first one in my family. My cousin was second. They didn't know what to do, you know, and by the time I was 16, I was sticking a needle in my arm, and I was an IV user for almost 15 years after that, and it got me 10.5 years in prison. So I spent, from 18 to 30, I spent maybe 15 months on the street. That was it. The rest of it was locked up.
Really?
And so for me, and I did drugs in there. Like, that's where I first found heroin at. I'd never really seen heroin. I'd seen pills, but I'd never seen heroin. And I had a cellie in there that had a habit, and it was crazy because in prison, everything's way more expensive. It's still there. It's just more expensive, and you get less of it. But, you know, I'd smoke every day, cigarettes and marijuana. And so when I got out of prison, I touched it for a few months. Because I didn't go to prison and get saved. I didn't, have this miraculous change. I had the same attitude, really. Every time I came out, I was going to get as high as I could, make as much money as I could until I went back. And so when I got out this last time in 2014, I messed up for about 5 months. And then March of, I got out October 6th of 2014. We got married November 1st of 2014. And then about March of 2015 is when I gave my life back to Christ, and thought that was going to change everything. And then I quit doing meth, and that's the last time I touched it. And then I did good for about 6 months, and then I started trying to smoke weed, and I'd sneak it because I didn't want her to know. She wasn't down with that, so I was like, man, I'd sneak it every once in a while. And we'd moved to Oklahoma at that point, and they made it legal in Oklahoma. So I was like, well, I'm not breaking the law no more. I'm not. But I did that for a couple years. Around 2017, I stopped, and I was like, okay, I'm done. And I was working at a lumber yard, driving a forklift, pulling barn packages, and I used to drink with a guy from work. I'd give him a ride, and he would to have the ride, he'd give me some gas money and buy me beer at the end of work. And so we did that for a while, and I got a DUI about 2 years ago. Or about 2.5. That was my wake up call. Like, oh man, I gotta stop.
And that proved to be an effective turning point for him.
In 2015, I was done. Like, I was like, I'm not going back to prison. And then I spent 14 hours in jail, and that 14 hours was worse than any 10.5 years I did, because it was a wake-up call to me. And so that's when I quit, and the only thing I had from there was nicotine, and I just quit dipping about a month ago, maybe a month and a half ago. So I did that since I was 12. So for me, that's a big thing. I try to get all of my vices out of the way. Even though it's not illegal or anything like that, it's still bad for you. And for me, I try I try to live my life under that guise of like, I'm going to try to live healthy so I can do more work, make a difference, because if you're sick and unhealthy all the time, you're not going to be able to make a difference because you got to rip and run to do that. And then this job, definitely, we do a lot of ripping and running. So
that's a great quote. I love that. So I want to jump back into what you guys are doing for work right after this, because that is. You guys are quite a combo with that. That's a cool story. So what's your story like?
What's my story like? I was raised in a good Christian home. My grandpa was a preacher. My mom died when I was 2. That didn't affect me until my teenage years, really. I was really good, and then I just got with the wrong crowd in school. Stopped playing sports, kind of broke my arm, and it just kind of went downhill from there. I broke my arm my sophomore year, and then I got depressed, because I wanted to be a superstar softball player, which I was good, but I wanted to go pro, you know what I mean? Yeah. And when I broke my arm, it just kind of went down from hill from there. I broke my arm, and I missed that whole season. I missed all my tournaments on the outside of school, and then the next year they wanted me to. I had to get my strength back, but I didn't really practice to get my strength back. So my arm wasn't as strong as it should have been, So they moved me positions, and it just messed me up, and so I quit. And I was about 17, so I really started using drugs. I started smoking weed, and then I left home. I moved out, and I got with a girl that she was about 26, and she was leaving her baby daddy. We went and moved in our own place, and she introduced me to the hard drugs. She introduced me to cocaine, meth, all that I didn't even know. So popping pills, and I just started doing that, and I thought it was okay. And then got really messed up on it for a couple of years. I tried the needle one time. Thank God that I was freaked out of needles and I didn't continue.
Right.
But so I did that for a couple of years. I got pulled over. That scared me to death. Because I should have went to jail that night. I don't know how, by the grace of God. But that kind of straightened me up a little bit. Not all the way, but a little. I don't know. One day I started going back to church and just stopped. I just stopped using.
Okay.
Kinda.
Yeah.
And then I started back. It's kind of a back and forth thing. And then I traded my drug addiction to gamble. I was like, well, I'll stop doing drugs and I'll do this. And I kind of bounced on that a little bit. I got a job at a school, so I couldn't do drugs because I needed to be clean. I worked at a school, so that really kept me sober. You know what I mean? And so I ended up stopped everything. I stopped gambling. I stopped everything. I was sober a couple years before we met, and then we met, and I went through all the craziness with him. And so I seen not just my side, but also seen his side of him struggling. When he was on meth, when he would not bring it around me, but I knew. So, it was kind of a hard thing, but I stayed sober through it all. Like I said, I've been sober 11 years from everything. Like, I can't smoke a cigarette because that leads me to something else. Yeah. Like, if in my mind. So I just work it out like that. I can't have, and I know that cigarettes ain't bad, but that, for me, I can't have that. Yeah. Just like going to a bar when I can't go to a bar. When he first got out, he'd want to go to the bar and dance, and I couldn't do that because that would lead to me wanting to smoke weed, wanting to do pills, wanting to get drunk, and it's just one of those gateways that opens up for me. So
I was going to ask, like, the age-old question, like,
yeah, so it's really one of those, like, smoking a cigarette. In my mind, I frustrated, and then I'm like, oh, I've been messed up. Let me just go to the next thing, and not that it's going to trigger me for drugs, but to me, it's just a gateway for me. Like that, I had to. You can ask him.
And also too, as far as the gateway drug, I tried marijuana first. Of course, I'm not necessarily going to call it a gateway drug, but it opens the chances because now you're around a different kind of people. Because most time, people that smoke weed know people that do something else. Even I've known people that literally have only smoked weed their whole life, or smoked weed for a little bit when they was a kid and then quit and grew up and didn't do nothing else. But you increase your chances of it. So in a way, it is kind of like a gateway drug because you're gonna meet people that normally you wouldn't meet if you didn't smoke.
So it seems like there is quite a social element about getting into drugs, but also in recovery.
Some of the things I struggled with back then would have been easier if I would have had somebody helping me through that. And I think that's why I say that peer support is like really important. I mean, like, it's really opened my eyes of how much it's needed and how important it is.
So Jeremy and Edna end up being really good at this peer support position because they see how important that is. They've had those experiences firsthand. So keep in mind, though, that their job is not to have all the answers, but rather to just be a point of reference for people. So these two are even in a more unique position because of their marriage. So what's it like for these two to be working and sharing their joint experience?
Amazing.
It's awesome. I mean, we've had, I've put this woman through a lot. So for us, I mean, it helps because, you know, she works with the females, I work with the males, but then also she can also work with the families because of what I put her through, you know, so she can even say, like, I know what it's like to have a family member that's going through that, you know, and I think it really gives us a little bit more dynamic because we're able to talk to more people, not just the addict.
Yeah.
You know, I'm real big on encouraging the parents because, you know, all my family gave up on me. You know, I was so bad of an addict, and I mean, I sold drugs to do drugs, and I was so bad that, you know, it didn't matter who it was. If I needed drugs, I was going to get it however I needed to. And so for me, I encourage the parents because pretty much my family gave up on me. You know, they still prayed for me and all that, but like my Meemaw, she prayed till she died in 2009. I'd been in prison a few years at that point, and she died in 2009. And in 2015, you know, I gave my life to Christ, and even though I didn't walk that perfect path at that point, I still got to, that was the beginning of my way back, you know. And so 6 years later, God still heard them prayers. You know, he still answered them prayers. And so she was dead and gone, been dead and gone. And so I encourage the families with that. And she's also able to talk to the mothers and the wives. And I have a client right now that comes to mind. She's able to talk to the wife and be like, hey, look, I know sometimes you just want to slap him in the back of the head, but, you know, you gotta, you know, she's able to give them the advice to, you know, how to manage that, because a lot of times we'll go about it the wrong way with addicts, and then you push them farther away instead of bringing them in.
Because I went through that with him, like when he was messing up, and he thought he was hiding it. I mean,
yeah,
I went through that. I went through the too pushy, the too much, to the, and then I learned to just back off and let it play out. And when I did that, it worked a lot better. So I have that perspective too, that I've actually been able to help people with that, even like since I've been up here. I mean,
and the fact that she stayed sober through all that was, I mean, pretty amazing for people. I mean, to tell people, because
really.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm not proud of it, but man, I put her through a lot. And if it would have been me and the roles were reversed, I probably would have used right along with her, because I don't think I'd have been strong enough at that point.
Yeah.
And she was, though. So.
But I had no desire. You know what I mean? Like, I had no desire at that time. I just kept pushing. I'd throw it up sometimes, but I mean, deeply in my heart, I didn't mean like I wanted to go get high. I just wanted to just kind of like scare him.
Yeah.
The tactic, but it didn't work.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
It didn't work, but.
So you found a balance then between like tough love and acceptance kind of thing.
Yeah. I didn't enable, but I just I learned that put my foot down, but don't be down his throat. Don't. There's a way you do it. You don't, I know you're doing this. I found this. I would just honestly let it play out for a couple of days, and then once it's called calm, I'd approach him with it, and I did that, and honestly, I think that's when he started really like changing.
That's when I was able to, because honestly,
like, because
it's you expect as an addict. You expect your family to get mad if they find needles or if they find beer cans or whatever. You expect them to get mad and fly off the handle. So when she didn't, I was like, "What's wrong? Like, am I safe to go to sleep tonight? Like, what's going on?" Like, I mean, honestly, I'm questioning myself. Like, man, I know she found them. They're moved. They're not. They weren't how I left them. So I'm like, I would know, and I'm like, for days I would be sitting there beating myself up. But then I'd finally come, and she'd be like, "Okay, so do you want to talk about it?" And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's talk about it. But that was the turning point, because before, like she said, she had her foot on my neck, and that's not the way to do it. But when she would still put her foot down, but she would let me mess up, and instead of just full force going at me, she let my own self, she let my mind do it for her. Yeah. Because you're going to beat yourself up if you have any willingness to change. I believe the willingness to change comes way before the actual change, because we get sick and tired of it. There was times, when I was, I remember one time I was on the run, It was my second time about to go to prison, and I was on the run. And I remember one night I was sitting in a bathroom, and I didn't even know these people. We had just talked about their house. There was a drug house, and I'm sitting in the bathroom getting high. And I remember right after I did my shot, I was like, man, what am I doing with myself? I had a chance to play college ball with the D2s, and I messed that up. I didn't, I quit school, and I'm like, what am I doing with myself? I'm about to go to prison for the second time. And I was wanting to change at that point, and that was, I think I was around 21 at that time. And, but then I got caught and I went back, and I came out and did the same thing, and I just, when I went to prison the first 2 times, I just learned how to be a better criminal. I learned more illegal stuff to do, and so for me, it was one of them things that I had to realize the willingness to change isn't enough. You have to start taking the action. And that's where, I think that's where a lot of addicts get stuck at is that willingness to change and the action step, because once you can admit you got the problem, then you become willing to change, and then that takes that next step is taking action on it and putting what you learn in all these rehabs to play. Because if you don't put it to play, then you can want to change all day, and you can know how to change all day long, and that's great, but you got to put action to it. And that's where we get stuck a lot, I think.
Yeah.
I think that one important thing with him, like when he come out of prison, he didn't trust nobody. So his beginning steps, like I said, he messed up for 5 months, whatever. And then he's like, okay, I can't do this no more, because, he had to get pulled back. And I think that's when that's when it started, like, okay, I got to change. Mm-hmm. Speaking of the prison, when he come out, like, I really believe, not to toot my horn, but if I wouldn't have been there to support him, he would have already been back in prison. Mm-hmm. Because of the things that he had to go through, that there was no support when he come out, like the classes, the money, to get his license, to get all these things that he needed, even to get a job.
In Texas especially, when they send you out, there's not a lot of pre-release. Mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of programs that will get you ready for that, and that's that's why I'm so passionate about going back into the prisons, because that to me that's where that revolving door comes in. Yeah, because you're putting them right out there in the mix of everything, and instead of making sure they have an ID, because I was locked up 7.5 years the last time. Mm-hmm. And that was flat. I didn't get out at all at that time. So for me, I had went, when I went to prison, the Razor phone was the hot thing. When I got out, it was like iPhone 6, and I'm like, what's this? And then I would go to a job, and they're like, hey, apply online. What do you mean apply online? I just need to talk to the manager. I'll fill out an application right now. I got, they're like, no, we do it online now. And I'm like, okay. So, and she had to help me, even though I know computers. I'm like, what? Why would I fill it out online? You lose that face to face. Yeah. And so that's why I want to get them, make sure you got to have an ID, a social security card, because if you don't have that, how are you going to get anything?
Even with him, like, they really, like, tripped him out, like, not being able to do that face to face. Coming out of prison, and you're trying to get a job from applying online, they couldn't see him to see that, I'll work. And so that was a big barrier for him. Somebody that's coming out, trying to stay out of prison, I think that, to me, that's why he still used a little. And he wasn't quite done, is because it was too much. The pressure was too much. And then plus they
made me go back to where I was from. Yeah. Instead of giving me the option to move somewhere else, like go to, they made me go back, and I'm like, I'm not going to do it. Because the difference. That's why we moved to Oklahoma.
Yeah, when we moved to Oklahoma, things started really changing. I think you actually stayed sober. You were actually pretty good there for the first year, wasn't it? Till we lost his mom. We were to about 6 months. Yeah. Then he lost his mom, and he did really good right then, and then come back to Oklahoma, and that's when he really started struggling a little bit, a little more. But I mean, even with my perspective, I've been sober 11 years. Like, I won't touch this. I won't, going through that with him. That's why I would get so angry, like mad, like, you're supposed to not do nothing. You know what I mean? Like, why are you sipping a beer? Why are you, smoking a joint? Whatever you were doing. And that's when I said I would get so mad. And then, like, I got to a point where I would just draw back and just pray, and just, even if I found it, even if I knew, I wouldn't mention it. And I would eventually approach him, or he would approach me. Now, very rarely would he approach me, but a lot of the times I would just be quiet about it. And you could tell he was beating himself up. It was eating him alive. Yeah. But that's where, once again, I think that having a peer and having somebody walk through that with you, because if he would have had, I think, a brother by his side, somebody by his side to help him in that first year. Yeah. It because like
that's the thing about a peer is they're able to see, like, they know what you're about to go through. They know the pitfalls you're about to fall into. So it's easier somebody that's been there, you know, because take somebody that ain't never been addicted. Well, you can't tell me what I'm about to face. You don't know what I'm about to face, but somebody that's walked through it. That's why I think it's so, because I mean, we don't have any degrees. Like I wasn't even, what was I in college at the I think I had just started college, just enrolled in college when I got my job as a peer. So for me, I was like, man, I'm not even college educated. I'm able to work in this field because this is a, you know, social work field. It's huge. There's so much you can do in social work, but I didn't even have a degree. But it was but like my boss in Oklahoma told me, she was like, look, your experience trumps your not having a degree. Yeah. We would rather you have this experience than have a degree right now, because you're able to we're the beginning stages of recovery for them, and then the therapist pulls them through that. The LCSWs, they pull them, and then they're able to help them, you know, come up with the coping skills and help them, you know, get through the stuff. Because a lot of the times we use is because of trauma. You know, it's not that we're addicts first. We've been traumatized as kids or whatever happened, or even as adults, and then we start using. It's not that we, you know, just I was just born to be an addict. No, there's something behind that most of the time when people use.
So I know that was just a complete unloading of a lot of information, but that just goes to show how big and tricky and messy of a problem this turns into. Because once addiction becomes a part of your life, its roots set in and spread out. But here we are with a couple final thoughts before we go.
You know, don't give up. You know, don't enable your people to keep using. But the most important thing I could ever tell a parent is just, you know, don't give up. Put your boundaries down and stick by them. Don't let them overstep them. And when they do, hold them accountable for it, because that's what's going to make them change. When they start suffering consequences, you're going to change. You know, you're going to do something different, you know, whether it's just smoking weed. Because, you know, a lot of times we don't look at it as harm reduction. You know, that's kind of like with the syringe exchange. You know, when I first came into this field, I'm like, that's the stupidest idea I've ever heard of. And then when I started seeing it, and then I get with the health department and I'm seeing the benefits, and I'm like, man, so we're cutting down on HIV. We're cutting down on Hep C. Because most of the people I hung around had Hep C. They had you know, there was a bunch of my friends that I grew up and went to school with that were IV users that died or are dying because of that, you know. And so for me, like, it's harm reduction, you know, but you got to stick by them boundaries, because until they realize, like, hey, I can't keep doing this, there's going to be things that I got to pay for, then they're going to keep doing it until they have to face some consequences. So basically just don't give up, you know. And hey, if right now they're just wanting to, you know, they want to think that they can do it, let them do their thing, but don't enable them, you know. So
the only thing I'd say is for the addict and the families, I mean, don't suffer in silence. A lot of people won't say nothing because even though they're getting high, they're embarrassed. They still have that, but take that step.
Or
and
the
reach
families
out.
are ashamed because their kids are getting high.
Yeah, take that step and reach out, because I mean, it could change somebody's life. It could save them. I mean, and I think that's what kept me sober, is I reached out. I didn't just try to do it all alone. I finally found somebody to confide in, and you know, we worked together, and that's what helped me through the craziness of his addiction, you know. But a lot of people will suffer and not say nothing, and that's what makes them want to enable, makes them, you know, just give up and throw their hands up. So that's what I would say. Just, there's hope and there's help. I mean, just reach out.
So before we wrap this up, I would just like to add one more view that I've made since we recorded this interview initially. So from where I'm at, I've seen a lot of people throw a lot of money towards this addiction problem, trying to help things in whatever way they can. But it seems like hiring peer support specialists is one of the most effective ways to do that, because it directly provides more person-to-person interaction. But that's all the time that we have today. I'd like to thank a few people before going, like WSKV, thank you for broadcasting the show. Powell County Health Department, thank you for letting there be a show in the first place. But then also big thanks to Jeremy and Edna. You guys are incredible. Thanks for sharing your stories on the show. We really appreciate it. So once again, you've been listening to The Local Lens. We have new episodes coming out every week, so keep up with us. I'm your host, Nate Brooks. These are our people, using our voices, telling our stories, because no one sees it like we do.